And when I'm not meeting Mrs. Jones in that cafe for a chat and nothing else, I'm listening to Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
Metro League High School sports are back.
Here's Jordan. Makes a stutter step inside, breaks a tackle. He's off and running. He's going to take it all the way.
Join Rainier Avenue Radio, your home team for Metro League football, basketball, baseball, girls soccer, track and field, bowling, and even more than that. We got you. Watch Metro League High School sports on Rainier Avenue Radio via Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch. You can listen in right at our website, RainierAvenueRadio.world, or download our app for free to listen and watch. Metro League High School Sports 2021 on Rainier Avenue Radio.world, powered by the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle, King County for Culture, and the Seattle Mariners.
This is Brenda Charles Edwards, host of Seniors Matter. Join me every week to get information on activities and issues that impact the lives of older adults and their families. That's Seniors Matter every week on Rainier Avenue Radio.
We got the feeling now.
R&B, soul, funk, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. We give you all that and more on Star Time. Join me, Paul Pearson, for a 2-hour trip through the history of R&B. A new episode every week on Wednesday at 2 p.m. Come and get the feeling on Star Time on RainierAvenueRadio.world.
Do you want to represent your city? This year, you can. Seattle residents who are interested in running for office in 2021 can use Democracy Voucher to fund their campaigns for the positions of mayor, city council, and city attorney. The city of Seattle offers one-on-one training for candidates at any stage. Learn more about how to run for office by visiting seattle.gov/democracy voucher or by calling 206-727-8855.
You know you can't get enough of Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
Can't get enough of that. Can't get enough of that.
That is my face. That right. I have to have my camera on. Hey everybody, this is Remoy Phillip. Thank you for tuning in today. I just want to welcome you to a conversation about the making of Mossville, a feature-length doc which will be shown on demand later today. This program is a part of a 3-day series on Earth Deserves More Than a Day, which is a collab of Rainier Ave Radio, Front and Centered, and Social Justice Film Institute. I'm super hyped to be a part of this week's programming. Again, my name is Remoy Phillip, coming to you from Brooklyn, New York. I am a producer of many things. I'm also an advisor to the Social Justice Film Institute, where a doc I produced called Hurdle was featured in the 2019 Social Justice Film Festival. I am a producer, but I'm always interested in hearing more about this experience of other producers, filmmakers, and just makers in general as they chronicle some of the most prescient and important issues of our time. So with that today, I think I have my guy Alex Glustrom here with me. I think he's driving, but I think he's here with us live in the Rainier Ave Radio Virtual Studios. Alex is the filmmaker behind the incredibly affecting and almost disturbing but powerful and important Mossville When Great Trees Falls documentary film. Alex, you there? How are you? Yeah. Can you hear me?
I am here. Sorry, I'm on the road. Can you hear me?
I can hear you well. It's all good, man. Looking good behind the wheel. This is going to be fun. Great. So, Alex,
I can do two things at once. I can definitely talk and drive. Don't worry.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so I'm definitely looking forward to hearing more about the film Mossville When the Great Trees Fall. But beforehand, can we, me, myself, and the audience hear a bit of your backstory as a filmmaker? Tell us your story, bro.
Sure. So I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. I did not actually find film until my mid-20s. Throughout my adolescent years, spray painting was my passion. I spent much of my high school and even into my early 20s just obsessed with painting murals. And my first film was about an abandoned hospital, which was kind of the crossover between the two things I loved, which was painting in abandoned spaces, and filmmaking. Was the first film was about the charity hospital, which is an abandoned hospital. And so my interest in abandoned spaces brought me to that building, and that we really got incredibly lucky that a really impactful film was presented to us, and it was just an incredible story that kind of landed in our lap. And that was my first film, and then that did well. And then while I was on a panel discussion for that film, a woman approached me, an environmental justice lawyer named Monique Hardin, who's a kind of a hero in the environmental justice community in Louisiana. She approached me and said, I want to take you to Mossville. This is going to be your next film. And she was right. And she was the one who brought me there. She introduced me to people in the community. And 4 years later, Mossville is being presented to the world.
That's an incredible trajectory, my guy. I'm not going to lie. You started off with the spray painting and the graffiti artist stuff, and then into film, and one film down, and here we are with Mossville. Okay, so Mossville is the subject of this story, but let's back up a little bit. This week is all up about the lead up to Earth Day, which is tomorrow, Thursday. And Mossville, When the Great Trees Fall is this really impressive film that we're about to talk to, that confronts the audience about the real life effects of environmental racism, and as you framed it, environmental justice here in the US of A. So before we jump deeper into the conversation, here's a trailer of the film to get us started.
Once there was a community founded by free slaves who lived in peace and happiness. We raised our own food. We looked out for one another. We existed.
There was just brutal racial violence through Reconstruction and into Jim Crow, Louisiana. It became this place that was a safe haven for Black families to live for more than 100 years.
It was one plant overnight, and the next plant. Here we are, surrounded by them.
The public learned of a chemical spill from a pipeline, one of the largest in U.S. history.
There's contamination in the ground and the groundwater.
Chemical compounds that have been linked to cancer and reproductive problems.
This tape holds the testimony of my parents.
My husband was found with cancer. Why does the whole community have the same problem?
September 1st, he was dead. And then my mom stage 4 cancer without her knowing.
Sasol announces they're going to have this $20 billion big mega project. If all plans were to go forward, Stacey Ryan's property is right in the middle of where the plans can be located.
Putting this fence up, it sends a message to them that I'm not going anywhere.
Sasol was established by the South African apartheid government.
Sasol's plant at Secunda is the biggest source of carbon dioxide on the planet.
Our preference would be to run that as a Secunda in Louisiana.
Being denied power, being denied water.
So he's living off the grid in the middle of a plant being built.
You could start with slavery. We always fought.
Sickness, cancer, that you gave, sending us to early grave.
They're erasing everything. Everything.
I'm human just like you. I breathe, I think just like you.
In parts of the United States that are tucked away, this is what industrialization looks like.
Where's the next place? Is it going to be your community?
Our struggle is a connected struggle for human survival.
We're in downtown Mossville. Population 1.
this trail right here, this is all we had. So tell me, would you fight to keep it?
Yeah, it's that trailer comes out hot, and the story comes out especially hot, and it's really affecting from jump. But Alex, can you give us just, especially the listeners and people who haven't seen the film and may not have any introduction to Mossville, like, can you give us more context to what and where Mossville is and how it kind of plays the central role in this film?
Sure. So Mossville is in southwest Louisiana. It's about 3 hours west of New Orleans, which is where I've lived for the past 15 years. I just moved back home to Atlanta, but lived in New Orleans throughout the creating of the documentary. And Mossville is a little town that was founded. Nobody knows exactly when it was founded because it was technically founded illegally. It was founded before the Emancipation Proclamation. So it was formerly enslaved people who had won their freedom or had escaped, basically created a little self-sufficient community. And then after the Civil War, more and more Black folks moved to Mossville, and it really became a legitimate town. So we're talking, the 1800s when it was founded, and it at the time was just kind of this swampland, an area where nobody else wanted to be. And they developed a self-sufficient community. They had their own gardens, and they hunted for all of their food. They had their own schools. They had their own fire departments. They really were a self-sufficient community that was able to stay safe from the terrible violence that was happening in Jim Crow, Louisiana at the time. And Mossville really was a success story of a very resilient community. And then starting in the 60s, industrialization started all around the town. And by the time that the film takes place, there's a cluster of 14 petrochemical plants that completely surrounded this little town. In the 90s, there was a spill of ethylene dichloride. They call it a spill, but it was really more of a leak. And it leaked for 6 months before anybody in Mossville was notified that this chemical was leaking into the ground. And Mossville folks had wells where they got their groundwater from, and they drank that water, and they watered their gardens with that water, and they bathed their children with that water. And it was full of a toxic chemical, and the cancer rates shot up through the roof. There were incredibly horrific reproductive disorders, respiratory disorders. Just about everybody in Mossville either has cancer themselves or has lost loved ones to a cancer. Every single kid is on breathing treatments, asthma. The toxicity is just not only a part of the air and land, but it's really a part of the human beings who live there, and it's an incredible tragedy.
Look, like, a lot of people may have heard of environmental racism or have heard of stories similar to this, but like you've just kind of said it, like everybody has cancer and everybody generations before have died of cancer. Let's not take that lightly. Like, these people are dying at age like in their 30s, in their 40s, and their 50s. Like, we hear that and we see that through the film. Did you, as the filmmaker going into this, have any sort of like real substantive context of that, or any kind of personal relationship to that? Or was it just kind of how you communicated earlier, like you got introduced by this lawyer and you slowly kind of ebbed in? And then if so, what was the shock of like kind of the tragedy of this all, just for you?
Yeah, admittedly, I was incredibly naive to what environmental racism was. In my very naive mind, I kind of thought that there are racial issues and there are environmental issues, and they're two separate things. And that's really not the truth at all. Race is so tied into everything. Of course, it's tied in to the environmental conditions that people live under. And Mossville is just a very clear example of environmental racism, but you don't have to look far to see instances of environmental racism all around us. In New Orleans, where I lived, the non-white people lived on the lowest lying land. So when the city floods, they get flooded first. There's so many instances that are environmental racism that are not even just toxic industries, But the way the oil and gas industry operates all over the world is really a clear example of environmental racism. I mean, they specifically target communities of color to put these dirty industries through, to run pipelines through their drinking water, to not go through the white drinking water. We see instances of this all over the world. And that's why when Sasol, the South African company that was founded during apartheid, literally was founded to keep the lights on for apartheid South Africa when there were oil embargoes on the country. When Sasol came to Mossville to deal the death blow to a historically African-American town, it really just seemed like there could be no more clear demonstration of what environmental racism looks like on a global scale. And I have to always give the biggest shout out to Monique, who brought me to Mossville and really took me through a whole graduate course of what environmental racism is. Also, I can't talk at all about the film without talking about Daniel Bennett, who is our producer on the film. He grew up in Mossville. I met Daniel super early on in my trips out there and we immediately became friends, and pretty quickly realized that the story would not be able to be told well or ethically without somebody who had the lived experience of growing up there. So Daniel was my number one collaborator. He's a photographer who grew up in Mossville, and him and I set out to tell his community story. And we've taken the film all over the world. It's played almost every continent. It's won more than a dozen awards all around the world. It just played a few weeks ago to the United Nations in Geneva. And it's been an incredible experience, not only showing the film to people from Mossville and people in Louisiana and people around the world, but also we've let it become a tool for environmental justice organizers all over the country to use. We've made it available for grassroots organizations to have fundraising screenings and organizing screenings. We have a whole impact strategy. And the goal from the beginning was to make a piece of art that could be used as a weapon to fight back against environmental racism, to fight back against these global oil and gas companies and what they do to communities all over the world.
No, I really appreciate that. And I want to get to the collaboration part a little bit later, but first off, you talk about it being like a global systemic issue, and it starts in South Africa with Sasol. And at the end of the film, I'm wondering, there is no voice from Sasol in this film, but it's noted at the end that they chose not to comment or respond to this film or to the inquiry to be a part of this film. All that said, was the decision early on, because you have cameras on the ground in South Africa, we see this mirrored in South Africa, so that gives more grounding to this story. It makes it more powerful and more affecting to see the long history of that systematic, no diminishing about it, environmental racism, right? As you pointed out. So I guess my question first is, when did the decision come about to get cameras on the ground in South Africa? Was that an early decision? How did that come about?
Once again, shout out to Monique. I mean, she told us very early on in the process, she was like, to tell this story right, you got to go to South Africa. And I was like, South Africa? But she was totally right. I mean, I don't deserve any of the really wisdom of the creation of the layout of the film. I mean, Monique, she's our expert who's actually in the movie. She's really the one who brought us there and kind of manifested the whole thing. And it was a decision early on that we didn't really feel, Sasol didn't want to participate, but we could have got somebody who could have been the voice of oil and gas, or from some company, some executive. But we decided pretty early on that wasn't something that we felt like we wanted in the film. My first film, we wanted to make this more balanced approach. We'll show one side and the other side will have their piece, and it'll be this kind of back and forth. For this film, and much to what Daniel wanted, who grew up there, our producer, we didn't really feel like we needed to do that back and forth. We felt like what we witnessed was a very clear wrongdoing, and we wanted to show how that wrongdoing felt to our main characters. And we didn't need some white guy sitting in a suit in some corporate office to read off some sound bites that we've all heard a million times. It just takes you out of our characters' lives. And our goal was to immerse the viewer in Stacey's world and to have them feel what he felt, to hear the sounds that he heard all the time in the construction and the factories. And, every time we pulled the viewer out of Stacey's little plot of land, we felt like it was doing a disservice to the story because he didn't have a escape from that plot of land. And it really just didn't feel like with the flow of the film, we ended up cutting so much because we wanted the main core of the story to live in Stacey's mind, and the film is from his perspective, and it's really his story more than anything else. So, Sasol did not choose to participate in the film. They did harass us constantly. Their security guards were a very heavy presence every single time we were in Mossville. I mean, we have been detained countless times. Once they realized that, sitting us on the curb for 6 hours didn't really deter us, they alerted the FBI and told them we were doing suspicious activities near these potential terrorist targets. So FBI agents came to my house and detained me and interrogated me there. And the way that, Sasol's harassment tactics, they're not unique to the way the oil and gas industry tries to intimidate anybody who is telling the truth, because they don't want that truth out there.
Okay, so for context, Stacey Ryan is the protagonist of this film for the most part, or he's one of the primary protagonists, and it's his story, or the story about him is the fact that his house is like the lone house of Mossville, at least the proper or the original Mossville, literally laying like an island in front of these plants, right? And so and it's brutal watching this at times. Like, he is vulnerable as all get out. And to think about, like, environmental justice and so on and so forth for decades, it's kind of felt like this white, privileged, hippie kind of retaliation against these big corporations. But to see it from what it really is, like in the sense of environmental race in it, and in people of color who are the only characters in this film, especially Stacey. My question is, what was that relationship with Stacey like? Was that quick? Was he like game to have cameras with him from Jump Street, or did the relationship take over time? Was Daniel and him close? Like, how did that relationship come up, and what was Stacey's involvement like?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, I'm glad that you noted that so much of the environmental justice world doesn't focus on communities of color, or really even people. I mean, I can't tell you how many environmental film festivals we went to where we're the only film that was about human beings. It seems like in a lot of these spaces they care more about penguins than people. And it really is indigenous people and people of color who are really dealing with the brunts of the environmental consequences that we face. So with Stacey Ryan, I got to Mossville and I met Stacey Ryan the second day I was in Mossville. Basically, the people I was talking to there, it was mostly people who had already left Mossville. There was a pretty strong activist community there, but by the time we showed up, many of them had moved, and the town was really just decimated. But people kept saying, you got to go over there and talk to Stacey. Stacey's the one who's living in the middle of all this. He's the last one left. And so I was brought over there by Mr. Ronald. He drove me over to Stacey's property. And when I first got there, it wasn't completely cleared. He was the only one living over there, but it was still pretty green. But it was definitely one plot of property in the middle of just kind of a wasteland. And I had no idea who was going to walk out of that trailer. And out walked Stacey Ryan, and he really blew me away from my first interaction. Like you said, he's an incredibly vulnerable person. He's an incredibly honest person. He's not somebody who hides his emotions necessarily. He tells you how he feels. He's very charismatic. He's somebody who really just you enjoy being around, and I developed an incredibly close relationship with Stacey. I spent so many nights in his trailer and talking to him even after the cameras were off. And him and I, we still talk. We talked 2 days ago. We talk multiple times every week. He became a very close friend. He still is. But one of the reasons why, in addition to Stacey being the only one in this plot of land, visually it's very compelling. But also one of the things that we talk about that makes Stacey such a good character is that in a lot of ways, Stacey's story is a reflection of Mossville's story as a whole. There's no way that you could tell Mossville's definitive story. There's so many people, and as anybody who knows who's from a small town, there's a million different perspectives about the town, and we couldn't get every single person in there. We just knew it. But we thought that Stacey, in a lot of ways, he represented what Mossville represented, which was self-sufficiency. In a lot of ways, Mossville's founding was an act of activism. It was an act of resistance to found an all-Black community in the middle of white racist slavery, Louisiana, and to hide out. And throughout Mossville's life, it was a town that just wanted to be left alone. We use the term existence as resistance, and that's very much Mossville's story, and it's very much Stacey's story. Stacey fought back in the only way that he knew how, which was just to survive, just to exist. He made his own battery bank once they cut the power off. He dug his own sewage system once they cut him off of the sewer lines. He had his own water filtration system. I mean, he's an incredibly resourceful, resilient, self-sufficient person, which is exactly what Mossville was. Just a community that wanted to exist and be left alone from the violence that was all around them. And, just like with Mossville's story, Stacey also had to succumb to that violence.
Yeah, that's really powerful, man. I wish we could talk about this for a few more hours. Unfortunately, we only have a few minutes left. So with that, I'm wondering, you and your production team, you've had, and Stacey, Monique, the whomever is left of Mossville, what you have a social impact plan, you're doing all this social impact, but with Earth Day in mind and this idea of environmental justice or environmental racism, what do you hope to leave viewers with the message of this film in the light of Earth Day, Earth Week, Earth More Day?
Stacey, as with Mossville, as I said, it's not a spoiler alert that Stacey doesn't beat the plant and it never opens. Eventually Stacey does have to move, and his decision of when he moves is a very difficult decision that he had to make. But what Stacey really wants people to know is that there is resilience when people fight back. And even whether you win or lose, victory is not always defined by who ends up being there. In a lot of ways, Stacey's story is a victory. It's a victory because people have heard his story all across the world. The film's been translated into 6 different languages. And if you told Stacey and me when we were sitting in his trailer in the middle of the night filming that the United Nations would be showing this footage in Geneva and at their convention, we never would have believed it. And it is an incredible victory that people have heard this story. And the goal is that people can try to not let this happen to other communities. And so I encourage everybody to find out what's going on in your local community. And the best way to do that is look to the grassroots organizations, look to the people who have founded organizations who are being directly affected by industrialization. They're going to be the best ones to give you guidance on how you can get involved. And a lot of people wanted to help in Louisiana, and a lot of people wanted to send Stacey money. But what he wants is for people to send money to your local organization to support grassroots organizations. If you're in Louisiana, there's the St. James community, which is under attack right now by a proposed plastics plant, a Taiwanese plastic plant called Formosa. You look up St. James, there's just a great article in the Washington Post a couple of days ago about their fight. They could definitely use any support that people may have. And then another thing that I often suggest to people, especially in more affluent circles, is look where your money's being invested. That's something that I think a lot of folks don't think about. You give money to a mutual fund or to some sort of fund when you don't really know where the money's going. And a lot of times that money is being invested in oil and gas companies. So, put your money where your mouth is and invest in renewable energies. I think that until the economics work and until we divest from oil and gas, they're going to keep destroying communities and polluting our earth.
Look, Alex, I appreciate you. I appreciate everybody involved in this film. It's a very, again, powerful and affecting film. I would encourage anybody and everybody that's listening to check this out. It is Earth Day, but this film and this idea of environmental racism and then environmental justice against that racism is more important than ever. There is more programming through the rest of the day today and into tomorrow leading into Earth Day with more conversations, stories, and films. But next up is the film Mossville, When the Great Trees Fall. Check out the event type registration on the front and centered website. Please don't miss this film. I don't say that lightly, and I don't say that as hyperbole. Excuse me. Don't miss this film. My guy Alex Appreciate you driving and stopping and conversing with me and sharing about the film. It's really been a pleasure chatting with you, my guy.
Thank you, man. It was great to be on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, y'all.
Rainier Avenue Radio